Good evening, everyone. Can you hear me? No. Okay. It's not. We're not getting any sound. Chairman of FOLA, the Friends of the Ludlow Auditorium, and I will be the moderator of tonight's candidate forum. My wife Jacqueline, on my right, will be the timer, and Darlene, Remy, and Kevin Kuntz will handle microphones if needed for use of the audience. Okemo Valley TV will be recording and streaming the event in its entirety. I'd like everybody to just double check and make sure your phones are silenced so that we don't have extra alarms interrupting the speakers. We have 9 candidates joining us tonight, 7 candidates for the 3 Windsor County Senate seats, 3 Democrats and 3 Republicans and 1 independent, 2 candidates for the Rutland-Windsor House seat. They're seated, all 9 are seated alphabetically at the front tables. From your left to the right, Allison Clarkson, Democrat, running for Senate, Jonathan Gleason, Republican, running for Senate, Joe Major, Democrat, running for Senate, Andrea Andrea Murray, a Republican, running for the Senate, Mark Nemeth, Independent, running for the Senate, Adrian Raymond, a Democrat, running for the House, Becca White, a Democrat, running for the Senate, Jack Williams, a Republican, running for the Senate, and Kevin Winter, a Republican, running for the House. There are brief profiles for each candidate in the information package that was at the front of the room when you came in. If you didn't get one and you would like one, Darlene will take care of it. Just raise your hand and she'll get it to you. No. Yeah, that's a good one. We will time people, and at the end of the question time, if it's a minute and 30 seconds for each response, she's going to hold up a sign on the countdown, and then there's an alarm that'll go off when it's over. That's when they've violated the time.
That's when the floor opens up and you go right into the time.
I'm going to start by asking a few questions, and each candidate will get a minute and a half to respond. We're going to start from the left and go across through everyone. For subsequent questions, I'll start with the next candidate, and then we'll just go through that order. I don't really want candidates to stand up to answer. It just adds too much time. So just use the mic where it is, and that will be fine.
And these signs are how much time is left. So a minute.
Right.
No one can probably read those down.
After a few questions from me, we will open up for questions from the audience. A couple of rules for the audience questions. First, we'd like you to ask questions directed at all the candidates, not selectively at individual candidates. Second, we'd like you to come forward to the podium to ask your question because we're having feedback troubles with our wireless mics. And again, in response to audience questions, each candidate will be allowed a minute and a half to respond. And then at the end of the evening, whenever that is, each candidate will be allowed 2 minutes to make a closing statement. With that, I will start with the first question. And the first to respond will be Allison Clarkson. Given that a large number of local education budgets were not approved earlier this year, how would you propose to finally deal with high education spending levels in Vermont? Don't deal with the funding question. I'll ask that next. Allison?
Thank you. Allison Clarkson. We had an extraordinary confluence, sort of the perfect storm of costs that hit us this year. So I will address the challenges of what we had to pay for. And we were coming off of the ESSER funds, the COVID funds from the federal government, which really in some ways had masked the inflation that had gone on for the last 4 years. We faced a 16.4% increase in healthcare costs for our teachers and staff. We had inflation that we were dealing with. We had PCB cleanup. We had mental health, huge numbers of, as you probably all are aware, mental health challenges that our schools and staff are facing with our students and with the faculty themselves. And in addition, we had a number of schools had gone ahead with their renovations and rebuilding, and we had those bond payments to pay for. I would say that it was the perfect storm for education funding this year, and it caught us a little bit off guard when the tax commissioner announced in December that we were going to have a 20% increase in property tax. We got to work, maybe not as fast as we needed to. And so that's what we were facing. Voters passed the budget, and I will remind us all that as we pass our budget, you pass a bill to us that we then have to figure out how to pay. And the responsible thing is to pay your bills. And so we did. Thanks.
Jonathan.
What I would start to do is look at the budget line item by line item. As a small businessman, I was faced many times with economic downturns. And what I would start to look at is what items can I possibly find a way to save some money? What can I do to possibly figure out how to make these extraordinary costs become easier to manage? Some of the things I would look at are school lunch program and the breakfast program. That's something that was great during COVID and was desperately a necessary item to have in the budget. But these days, I start to ask myself, what if we just sent out a survey to parents and said, do you need this? Do you want this anymore? When I talk to some of the educators, I hear about a tremendous amount of food waste. So that's one that I would think of. Another is insurance costs. One of the ways that we can start to bring down the health insurance cost is to incentivize younger teachers to come into our program. Vermont is losing younger people, and we're having a hard time keeping a population from aging the way we do. If we can start to attract younger people into the workforce, specifically teachers, you'll find that the way insurance works, as we have more people younger on the insurance, it will go down. So that's another way that we can start to incentivize the cost to go downward. Other ways, again, looking at our budget, but what I don't want to do is start taking things away that are adding to the richness of the education. We don't want the children to not be getting the education that they need and deserve here in Vermont. It's very important that we preserve a high-level education for the future generation. If we don't do that, then the children won't be well prepared to take on the future and so forth. Thank you.
Thank you. Joe?
Well, Vermont is the third highest per student in the country. Yet, its rank is about 24. We have to look at that. And are we educating our students as well as we should? One of the things that we have to look at is the formula that is put together per student. Education is so vitally important to us. We are losing our students as, and our young people as they move on. It is unfortunately one of the things that we have to look at on a continual basis. I have talked to some educators, and they say half of their time is dealing with the mental health of students. It is not like when we were older, in our day, where teacher came in, taught the lesson, and then they move on. We have to fund some of our mental health, which we didn't necessarily have to do when I grew up in the 70s and 80s. Jonathan talked about health care as well. Health care for students went up, for teachers went up 20%.
Andrea.
So education. Act 127 was our weighted pupil formula. That was a huge part of the problem that we have right now. So our Department of Education budget is about $2 billion to educate 82,000 schools. And what you'll hear is that's an average of $24,000 per student. The reality is that depending on how much of a budget a school can get approved is how much they have to spend. The Hartford School has 168 teachers. They allocate almost $31,000 per student. Springfield has 93 teachers, and they allocate $32,500 per student. Weathersfield School has, actually I don't know how many students they have, but they only allocate $22,000 per student. It's a huge disparity of how much we're spending at each school for each student. That needs to be a more level playing field. And the towns need to be a bit more responsible for the difference. If they want a new school, if they want new experiences. Some of our schools, I just visited a school up north, and they found out that they're going to cut their full drama department to save money. So instead of looking at other ways to cost, maybe there's excess administrative costs, maybe there's too many administrators. They're looking at cutting school student services instead. Thank you.
Excuse me for 1 second. I'm just going to ask you to put those mics in as close as you can to your mouth when you're talking.
Okay.
From that position, get in as close as you can. Thanks very much.
Okay, Mark.
So far, the conversation about education seems to focus on what I believe are elementary and middle and high school type education. I know that parents want to make sure their kids get the best possible education. I can't tell you how many of my friends who can afford it, like, move to Norwich to kind of position their kids to go to Hanover or something like that. Parents want good education. Legislature should deliver a good education. We have to be careful to spend what we have. We have to get out of bad spending habits. We really need to focus on our budgets and aspire for the good stuff once we have the priorities and the fundamentals done. And we also have to make sure that we aren't just simply taxing the heck out of everybody to make it. So we need to look at other sources. Responsible budgeting, responsible taxing, that's the way I would focus is a solution to economic ups and economic downs. You can insulate yourself. Where am I at? Good. All right. But I also want you to think about something else. Education isn't exclusive to anybody under 18. Adults need education too. Folks who are in situations where they're coming out of incarceration or a family breakup or just trying to make themselves better, we have to make adult education an answer as well, and we have to make sure that we're utilizing our resources to accommodate that interest as well. I could talk to you about that later on, but that sort of summarizes where I'm at.
Adrian.
I think what Vermont needs to do in every town is really decide what exactly we value in education. Do we want to have an elementary school in every town? I know the town I come from would bend over backwards 10 times to not lose the Shrewsbury Mountain School. And watching Ludlow, when you guys lost Black River, I'm sure you feel the same way about Ludlow Elementary. Well, if we're going to have buildings in every town, we need to determine whether or not we're really satisfied paying for that. Because buildings are expensive. Staffing buildings, we don't have any single grades in Shrewsbury. I don't know exactly, I know Ludlow has standalones, Mount Holly has combined classes for the most part. That is expensive. Healthcare is expensive. I'm on the healthcare commission as an employer commissioner. It was not a fun process. We lost both rounds. This year, we decided to just hedge our bets and leave it alone for a year to see if we could address the costs as opposed to the, the benefits that were offered. I think we need to really look at what we're paying for in education. If we're valuing our buildings, we need to pay for them. If we're valuing providing counseling for students that need it, we need to do it. Maybe we don't need it to do it through the education fund. Maybe we move that to the general fund and we figure out how to pay for it there. There are lots of ways to reduce costs.
Becca?
Thank you. Hi there, I'm Becca White, and I know we haven't really been able to introduce ourselves to you yet, but I'm from Hartford, and I went to Hartford High School, which is a public school. I did all K through 12 and then university as a Vermont public school student, so this issue is extremely important to me. The two ways that I would cut spending, because if I understand the question, and I'm repeating it so that others down the line know, is you're asking in education spending what you would reduce, not the how we raise the revenue question.
Correct.
Okay, so there's two ways that I think we can address the problems we have now. The first is that when you as an individual community vote for your school budgets, the lever of yes or no doesn't actually impact your tax rate in a substantial way. So that means you could vote no for your school budget and still have a higher tax rate. You could vote yes for your budget and get a lower tax rate if you subsequently lower it and pass a budget. So when we get your bill, when your school board decides that amount, there's a disconnect between your decision-making ability at town meeting and our ability to actually make cuts. We can't go line by line in your school budgets, and that's where the cuts would have to happen. So we need to have an accountability mechanism that lets towns make those decisions and have it actually reflect their individual tax rates while having uniform education standards. The last idea would be around the BOSES model, which should support special needs education being at a higher regional level rather than the way we have it district by district now. Thank you.
Jack, you're next.
All summer I've been fighting kind of hoarseness in my voice, so if it sounds kind of odd, that's what I've been fighting. Okay, when it comes to the school education system, we're looking at quality versus cost. In quality, we need to hire good Secretary of Education people to work with the quality of education. That's where a person like Zoe Sanders comes in. Work with her to develop the quality of education. Now, the cost, that's the second part. How do we come up with a way to fund school budgets? The first thing I would do is take the property tax, totally disassociate the education budget with it. I would put the education budget in the general fund. It wouldn't even be funded by the property tax. The different forms of revenue would be used to fund the school budget. Now, in the general fund, you could design your whole school budget right in there. Now, the next thing is the merging of schools. You would work with all the people on how this is working out. One of the people talked about funding of the buildings. You would have to look at a capital fund, how to fund your buildings on a long-range plan. So the three parts is your quality of education, secretary, put the education in the general fund and look at the merging of the schools. Thank you.
Okay, Kevin.
I'm impressed with all the information that you just received. I won't waste your time because I don't have a specific recommendation. The reality is that the population in Vermont has been decreasing since 2010 until we got to COVID, and then it had a significant increase, but that was in the population of 65 years and up. We have an issue. We have students in a declining quantity, if you will, and when you have that situation, you have to look at it on a whole scale. No one wants to lose their elementary schools. I agree with you. But we may have to consolidate. We have to stay within our tax means. If we keep raising the cost to live in Vermont, we're going to lose population rather than gain population, and the problem is going to considerably increase. That's just a reality we have to look at. We need to make Vermont affordable again, and education is one of those areas where we may have to take some choices that don't feel good, but are reality.
Thank you. A little bit of a quick follow-up question. Is it possible, in your judgment, to constrain or reduce education spending and still maintain local control? Start with you, Jonathan.
I think I heard that.
Yes, I do believe that that is achievable. At the moment, it seems to me as though there is a bit of a lack of accountability in the whole education funding system. What I would have liked to have seen in the yield bill passed by the legislature is some meaningful education reform, such as limiting the amount of a per pupil cost or limiting the amount that our taxes can go up on the property year over year. Vermont right now is only one of 3 states in America where the legislature is allowed to raise your property taxes whatever they want. New Hampshire's the other one. That makes sense because they don't have any other taxes like income tax and sales tax. Tennessee's the third. They just don't seem to have the problem. But I believe we can achieve that and still leave local control over the schools in your area. But we do need some sort of meaningful reform to the way that we're paying for the education itself. Thank you.
Joe.
I think one of the things that you absolutely have to do is put some constraints around the local school boards. I think that for them to spend whatever they would like is untenable. And I also believe, I've heard consolidation is a model, and I reject that because, particularly in the elementary schools, because we have found that if a pupil goes to a different district, then unfortunately they don't learn as well. So it's going to be very difficult to do that. I cannot see both the legislature and the local school boards not working together to come to some conclusion. Thank you.
Andrea?
So there's a few things, and I've mentioned it before, that we need to have a standardized per pupil rate. We know how much it costs to what do we want our salaries to be for our teachers, to keep our salaries, to keep our teachers. We know what our healthcare costs are, and we know a general amount to an average school building. So if we have a fixed amount per student rate, and then the budgets that the towns are voting for is more closely linked to their budget, not a budget of of Hartford, not a budget of Woodstock's that wants a new school. We get our budget based on what our town's needs are for our students that we have. And also the education fund monies, they should be focused on the K through 12 education. There shouldn't be new obligations and new items that keep getting added to the education fund. That's bloating our education budget, and it's for things that are not necessarily based on educating our students. And that's going to reduce that quite a bit. Thank you.
Mark, go ahead.
I'm not a big fan of consolidated power. I like more people to make decisions about, about things that are going to affect more people. I think towns need to have local control, and if they want to add elements that improve their system, that can remain on a local level. Hopefully the town is active enough amongst themselves and people come out to vote. I just looked up a quick statistic, and it looks apparently they were up to, I just want to double check that because I just forgot the number. There were, I think it was 80 budgets that were voted down in towns. Okay, and that number may be wrong. I think it was 80. The bottom line is this. Local control is good, but the state has to step in. Another area where this is of concern to me is police services, because education, like police services, is incredibly important aspect of your local community. And I think there was a proposal, that came down from Governor Scott's office, and I think it warrants some consideration, that we may need to start to think about consolidating and collaborating our resources. And that's best done at a legislative level. And I'm not opposed to considering multiple town alliances for police departments and for schools. So I say maybe is the answer to the question.
Adrian.
I do think it's not impossible to cut costs and still keep quality, but I want to bring something up that I think is not being mentioned. We've had local control over spending in the past, and what happened was that some kids got really poor educations because their districts didn't want to spend the money, and other districts had a lot more capacity to raise money without it hurting anybody, and those kids got trips to, wherever to practice their sports, they got turf fields, they got all sorts of things. So to merge our money together or to consolidate our money makes a lot of sense. When I was on the school board in Shrewsbury, we had the lowest cost in our district, but that was because we had young staff. So maybe, I hate to say it, but we do need a statewide teacher's contract, and then it's not a big deal. I hesitate greatly to say that because having taken part in the health insurance negotiations, it was a fiasco in terms of saving money. I think with a careful construct on how those negotiations would happen would be imperative to do that. But I think that is something that we could do to keep the quality in each district and still contain some costs. I mean, there's other ideas, but we only have a minute and a half.
Becca?
You've asked the perennial question, can you constrain or reduce education spending while also maintaining local control? I mean, I can picture Representative Jim Harrison, Senator Alice Nitka, or Senator Dick McCormick getting the same question every year at this forum. And we haven't hit the nail on the head yet. We have something called the Commission on the Future of Vermont's Education that will be delivering a report to us, and I think that will be a major premise that they wrestle with. My addition to that question is how would you make it possible, because I think that is the goal. It's not should we or shouldn't we, it's we need to make it possible for local decision making to happen to best serve the unique needs of our community while also having an economic scale to afford that education. And one of the places that I see us being able to achieve that goal is through expanding county governance. So Vermont is one of the few states, I believe one of only 2, that does not have a county superstructure of government in addition to local and state. And lots of those small scale savings that other communities see, they get them because they do regionalize their services. And we even saw the example happen in my community when we did regionalize our vocational technical school. So it's those kinds of county-based solutions that I think would support a better economic scale while also letting more direct decision-making happen, so we're not competing with Burlington, competing with Bennington, for example. And
Jack?
as far as the cost of schools, again, I'm going to emphasize this. You take the school budget out of property tax. You create in the general fund the school budget. Now, the school budget itself will still be written by the districts. The people in the districts and the people that write the budget will have the say in what they want. Now, the money coming out of the general fund to fund the schools will be distributed equally among all the districts. So that's how you're going to get the equality in all of your districts. But I'm going to emphasize, take the budget out of property tax and put it in the general fund. Thank you.
Kevin?
Once again, I don't have a specific recommendation, but I know that 25 years ago when I got here, I was invited to join the school board. And when I found out that for every dollar Ludlow spent or approved for our own schools, $3.42 was going to the state for other schools, I knew we were in trouble. So the formula has got to be fixed so that the population who's voting on budgets and managing the schools feels like they're getting a fair shake. Otherwise, we're going to continue to exacerbate the problem that we see right now that's been kicked down the road.
Alice?
Thank you. Local control led to the inequities that Adrian talked about, that led to the Brigham decision, which is why we had Act 60 and 68. I think local control is essential. Quality of education is essential. I think the frustration that most school boards now have is that actually out of their whole budget, they actually have local control. They can make decisions over just a very small percent. I think like 14 to 20% they actually can make creative decisions about, because so much of it is constrained by other requirements, by salaries and benefits and all the other needs. So I think that yes, we can have both local control. We need to. Every school is unique, but we also need to have the state involved. I also, just because I didn't address the cuts I would propose, I think the education fund takes too many things, is holding too many things in it. I would take current use out of the education fund. There's no reason our education money should be paying for current use or our tax increment finance districts or our mental health. I think our designated agencies should be paying for our mental health work in our schools. So I think those are 3 incredibly expensive programs. I would take those out of the education fund so that our education tax dollars go further and could come down.
Okay, that's starting into my next question, which is also still related to the question of education spending. But it's now, more specifically, there's a debate, obviously, always about where the money should come from, whether it should come from property taxes or the general fund, and if not, what should go into the general fund from a tax point of view. What would you propose or support as an alternative to the funding mechanism that we presently have?
So you go down and give me the easy question.
Yeah.
I will say this, and you will hear different proposals for different funding mechanisms, whether it is to tax second homeowners, is it to expand the lottery, is it to, you've heard, go line by line with things. But I will say this, any thing that you do, there will often be unintended consequences. I talked about before, you talked about consolidating schools. And guess what? When you do that, like I said, particularly for elementary school students, their ability to learn decreases. We have a situation in our school systems that the infrastructure of our schools is deteriorating exponentially. Senator Clarkson's hometown of Woodstock presented a $99 million bond, which, guess what, did not pass. And you understand that. And before 2008, we had a infrastructure fund that funded infrastructure throughout the state. It's been 16 years. I think we go back to that, and that will help these infrastructure situations throughout the state. Thank you.
Andrea.
So I go back to limiting what is in the budget, the education budget, that it's focused on education. There are so many different aspects of it, and we need to designate that our students get the money that they are entitled to receive in order for them to have a great school experience. They shouldn't be worried about losing their drama classes, losing their art services, losing their sports. There needs to be a focus on allocating how much money can go to administrative costs and how much can go to the actual educating of our students, because that's what's going to give us a more even and equal education process. And it's not going to matter where that student lives if you're required to have a certain amount to each type of service. But as far as the education, yeah, we need to break it apart. We need to separate it. They keep lumping everything into education, and like Allison says, she's known that it's been bloated and expended, but she didn't do anything about it. So I think it's time that we had somebody come in that is ready to make those changes and fix the budget system. Thank you.
Mark.
So I checked that number. It's actually 30, not 80. But that's still a 10% representation of all the school budgets that got voted down. I also think about the question. I heard general funding, and I heard property taxes. There are other taxation. Bottom line is we're talking, I think, about public education. Because if it's a private school, parents and other benefactors will be making it available. So if we're talking about a public interest, I think we also need to keep in mind that there's grant funding that's available and federal funding, and that formula needs to take those elements into effect. Kind of goes back to my original point. Spend intelligently and find resources that are readily available. And I don't know as the formula elements have to be changed, it's just the way we execute it. And I sort of agree with Joe. You know, there are going to be a lot of different ways to toss this about. But I think the general approach, in answer to the question, is to simply come up with a formula that maximizes the available resources, explores other options for resources, make sure we get those built in, and then make intelligent decisions about the options that we have. I hope that's a reasonable answer for you.
Thank you. Adrian.
Tough question. I like the idea of starting the building fund back up again. We need to look at how we classify resi versus non-resi tax rates. I mean, right now we have a convoluted system where anybody that doesn't own and live in the house, that building is classified as non-resi. Well, there might be full-time people living in there. You might have a rental property. Why does that, I mean, and then the state has to sort of bend over backwards to give out renters rebates to make that more equitable for renters. Let those people pay a residential rate instead of a non-residential rate. Definitely the question of what are we paying for in the education fund. It is ridiculous, some of the things that are in the education fund. And truly, we could pay for special ed funding outside of it. We could pay for all of our mental health counseling outside of it. Maybe the state would have more, arguing power with the federal government on how much we get paid in terms of Medicaid for a lot of the special ed and other special spending that we have to spend on kids that need the help. I think we just need to really look at what we're spending and how we're spending it, and some of the problem will go away.
Becca?
A lot to talk about with this question. I would posit that we need to address how second homeowners, third homeowners, vacation rentals are taxed in our communities. For example, Maui, Hawaii has 9 different ways that they splice out how people get property taxes, and it's based on how long you live in the community, around the full year, where your income comes from, and it makes sure that residents who are experiencing the inflated costs due to tourism are actually paying a lower amount than the individuals who are the tourists in those locations. And that's something that I think we need to address. 80% of folks in Ludlow, 80% of homes in Ludlow or residences in Ludlow are not full-time residences. 60% in Bridgewater, a community I did not expect to see that type of number from. That is a problem. And it's skyrocketing our housing values, and it's also causing the cyclical problem of keeping young people in our communities. As a younger person, as the youngest person on this stage at age 30, this problem is not one that will be solved overnight, and it's not one that will be solved with the traditional thinking we've had over the last 30 years since the passage of Act 60. And I hope that we have folks with perspectives that are different in office, and I hope that you elect me or re-elect me so I can be part of that younger voice of people advocating for that type of change.
Getting back to property tax. Look at the states that have the lowest property tax. Look at the states that have the highest property tax. Go to the middle, the medium, cap Vermont's property tax at that level or lower. This will do 2 things. It'll bring people into the state, and it'll bring retirees in by lowering your property tax. Take the school budget totally out of property tax, put it in the general fund, go through the budget line item by line item, eliminate the waste in the budget, and look at ways to fund your school through all the different sources. It's that simple. Thank you.
Kevin?
I like simple. If you can't pay your bills, you're getting yourself in trouble. And right now, we're finding it difficult to pay our bills. So we need to take a look at all the sources of funding and prioritize where it is going. Because if you're robbing Peter to pay Paul, you're not solving the problem, you're just squishing the balloon from one place to another. So we have to make Vermont affordable again so that we attract families and solve the problem, not just keep pushing it around. And I don't have that solution, but we've got to be realistic about where we're going, otherwise we're going to continue to have the problem.
Allison?
Thanks. How do we reform our education funding system? We desperately need to update what was once an equitable and progressive funding mechanism. Vermonters must be able to pay for education in a sustainable way. We can't resent paying for education, which is our largest economic development investment in this state. We must be able to come up with a method of taxing Vermonters based on their ability to pay. 70% of you, of all of us, 70% of Vermonters pay by their income, get a rebate. That's paying by their income, a percent of their income. We need to pay on the market value of homesteads, not second homes. Owning a second home is a luxury and should be taxed accordingly. So I think both, we need to re-examine the ability to pay, which when I was on House Ways and Means, we did. It did require an additional surcharge, but we could all move to paying by our ability to pay, which is our income, with a modest surcharge. And we need to tax, I think, our seasonal residents much more fairly for owning a luxury item.
Jonathan?
When I was in business, I always noted that the larger the budget, the larger the management problem. It sounds to me, and what I'm hearing again and again, is the education budget should be partitioned. We should partition it down into its component parts. We could then look at those and evaluate which ones are growing, which ones are lagging, which ones we need to address more money to and allocate more funds. It's through those sorts of analysis that we'd be able to then maybe, tax the people who are out-of-staters at a higher rate, tax the Airbnb people at a higher rate. Maybe we do need to create more tax revenue. But what we don't want to do is create it on the backs of homeowners, average people who are living and working in Vermont. This has been the problem. This will be an ongoing problem if we stay on the same trajectory we are now. We need meaningful reform is what we need. If we don't get that, we're staying on this path that we have now. We need to analyze the situation and figure out ways to save money, figure out creative ways to raise more money in places that aren't going to hurt us, the local residents. Thank you.
Let's switch gears now to a different topic, housing. It's pretty clear, I think, that the availability of, I'm going to call it workforce housing, not affordable housing, but workforce housing is a significant constraint on all forms of economic development in the state. And obviously, it's also a constraint that's keeping young families from moving here. What would you propose to accelerate the creation of thousands of workforce housing units? Andrea, starting with you.
So I think our communities, to accelerate home constructions or housing units, I think our communities are already starting this. In Wethersfield, we're looking at allowing residential above commercial homes at a smaller size. These are buildings that are already constructed, so they just need to have homes placed within them, which is a very quick and fairly inexpensive process to do. You're allowed to improve accessory buildings with easier on the permitting process. And as far as the community, the Act 250 amendment made some improvements on that, but then it also made it harder for people to build in rural areas, which hurt all of our rural communities. We can't add those houses on the smaller communities, so we really need to balance that out so there can be growth all over Vermont and not just in certain areas. The people that are coming to live in the communities, they don't necessarily want to live in a consolidated community in the town. We don't have the infrastructure available yet to have clusters of buildings in a town. We don't have the walking areas or enough of the other water and sewage facilities prepared yet. So we do need to have some work done.
Mark. Sorry.
Thank you. This is a really hot topic for me, and this is one of the areas that I'm most concerned about. As an attorney, I spend a lot of time working with home buyers, purchasing properties. I work with sellers who are trying to sell properties, tenants, landlords, across the board. Bottom line is, you have to have inventory in order for people to be able to move or stay here. In the absence of inventory, no housing, people can't come in or stay. We also have to look at the cost. Costs are skyrocketing for housing purchases and for rentals. So it almost is impossible for folks to get their traction And then, for the folks who don't have money, where do they get the money? Lending is ridiculous right now. Interest rates are at 8%. And, you know, I once said to somebody, how's your credit score? And how's the tenant's credit score? I said, the tenant's credit score was 600. And they were like, well, they're bad credit. If you use a lot of your credit cards, if you use a lot of your credit card debt, if you have $10,000 of credit card and you have $8,000 because you've got a couple medical bills, your credit utilization is very high. And that drops your score down. Folks need help getting themselves in a position where they can rent and getting themselves in a position where they can buy. And it's hard when you're competing with folks who have cash and come in and outbid you on the first step. We need to do something about that. There is so much more to be talking about, but there's only 30 seconds left. At some point I want to talk to you, if we get a follow-up question, on rent and rebates and evictions in general. But the short answer is this. We need to make sure that our inventory comes up, and what we're doing now is an affront to that. And we have to help folks start, people who are here, actually start purchasing and renting.
Adrian.
Okay, I'm the zoning administrator in Shrewsbury. I get to say I'm the everything in Shrewsbury at some point this evening. And I know, I've talked to a couple of people in town that have larger tracts of land, and are you interested in doing something to try and expand the housing stock in Shrewsbury? And the reaction I always get is, no, it's too difficult, the regulations are too cumbersome. And I'm a proponent of Act 250. I really am not against Act 250. But I am somewhat affronted that somebody could be held up for a year or two with appeals for Act 250. There has to be some kind of appeal change so that they're reasonable. I also would enable hotels, motels to change to efficiency in one-bedroom apartments easily, make upstairs more available for housing, and encourage and fund community septic systems in smaller villages and towns that could still be built out and have available housing. They could have some of these big old houses, they could easily have 2 houses or more within them, but they don't have the septic capacity. And most small communities don't have the wherewithal to be able to do that. The state does, and we could make a revolving fund, we could do all sorts of things to encourage that. Those are a few ideas.
Back up.
Thank you. We spent a whole biennium on this question because housing is the #1 thing I hear from constituents about. It's a crisis. We worked on the land use planning bill. Senator McCormick and I spent a collective absurd amount of hours talking about a Tier 1A versus a Tier 1B status community, which is a retooling of Act 250 to actually address some of the concerns we just heard, to streamline the appeals process while also focusing on development of our downtowns in a smart growth way. So to answer your direct question, what is the one thing that I would do to grow workforce housing to accelerate thousands of new units? It would be wastewater and sewer investment. I mean, that's just bare bones why we can't build in certain places, is there's not enough capacity. And the reason we don't have enough capacity is we've largely underfunded municipal growth of sewer and wastewater systems. So that would be the big thing. Although you should know that you also have Senator Allison Clarkson, who worked tirelessly on S100, the homes bill, which created millions of dollars in helpful incentives to do the things that you heard already candidates mention, to support first-time home buyers, to support folks in recovery housing, to develop senior housing solutions and accessory dwelling units, and to do things like quadruplexing by right. So if you have any questions about the work that we have done, I'd also be happy to talk about that.
Jack.
First thing you want to do is to take property tax, lower your property tax like I brought out in the other one. That's going to attract your workforce. Also look at the fact of possibly seniors having a very reduced property tax. The next thing is workforce housing. How are we going to have that? Goes back to 1970 when they put the Act 250 in place. Act 250 restricted all the building in Vermont. So you I'm not saying getting rid totally of Act 250, but you really look at Act 250 and you allow building throughout Vermont, in the rural, in the city. You get free enterprise involved in it. You lower your property tax, restructure Act 250, then look at financing. Look at financing throughout the whole nation, financing young couples in getting their first housing. And that's 3 simple solutions. Thank you.
Kevin?
I like those solutions, Jack. If we don't solve the affordability of our housing, we're not going to attract people to Vermont, which is the biggest problem we have right now. We have got to review every cost that we're laying on individuals, whether it's regulations or taxes, and we have to tighten our belt. We have got to make progress in the direction of living within our means, not hoping there's going to be more to squeeze. I don't have a specific other than what I've heard. I've got a lot of great ideas here. What we need to do is we need to understand what the root cause is, we need to look at those options, and then we need to boldly make some real changes, not just keep squeezing the balloon one way or to the other.
Allison?
Thank you. We've begun, anyone who's followed the work on this over the last 4 years knows that we've already done a huge amount of updating of Act 250, aligning permits, making it easier for people to develop, green lighting in areas that are appropriate for development. I agree with Becca that we have the federal infrastructure investment program where we can be, and Vermont League of Cities and Towns is helping towns apply for municipal sewer and water. We green light and make very, very fast the ability to build in smart growth areas in our towns. The log jams right now are downsizing, getting people out of their big homes and getting younger workforce into a starter home. And we have enabled that in all sorts of ways. We've addressed the low-hanging fruit, which we can do quickly while we wait for our workforce and inflation to go down a bit, because those are big log jams in our development right now. But we have low-hanging fruit of our Vermont Housing Incentive Program, which enables us to take blighted, vacant, and non-code compliant properties and redevelop them, and also to create accessory dwelling units in your homes that may be too large for one person, and they would like to develop an additional housing unit. And there's the home share program, which is also wonderful. There's lots of great housing work being done.
Jonathan?
When I see the numbers, I was reading the other day, we need 30,000 new housing units by 2030. So I'm pretty good at math. That's 6,000 units per year. So I started asking some general contractors, what's the feasibility of getting that done? And they said, hey kid, I'm out 3 years before I can build the next house. So my point is, traditional construction, stick construction, isn't going to work. Right now we're at $450, $500 per square foot for that sort of construction. That's just too much money. My suggestion is we think outside the box and we look at more modular, tiny homes, things that are already built. These types of structures are 6 to 8 months lead time. They build them in a warehouse and ship them out. I took a tour of the Windsor jail. That area would be ideal to put in a house or a tiny house community. You could put in a dozen to start. It's a malleable structure. You can move them around. You can add and subtract. In that community, the sewage system would accept that many new units. Not a problem. There's plenty of people that could be in those houses and they could be working at the hospital, traveling nurses, that sort of thing. I think that if we could identify more areas like that of where we could try modular housing, it could blend into the landscape, not look terrible. I don't like the idea of huge buildings. Thank you.
Joe?
Well, I have had some experience with this. Throughout the country, local theaters, regional theaters have been closing. A regional theater in White River Junction, the Northern Stage, was on that brink. And it was on that brink because they could not find housing for their employees. We have current mechanisms already in place to help with that if you have buy-in from the business. There is a state housing initiative that is put forth by the state treasurer. What I did is I had the state treasurer come and walk the site with the executive director of Northern Stage because they needed workforce housing. What happened was they needed $4.8 million to build these apartments in this campus for their employees. What happened is I facilitated the bank with the treasurer with the business. And instead of having an interest rate of 7%, now it's only 1%. And they were able to get that loan. Construction is happening now. They were renting renting apartments already. We pulled their full-time workers from that, and now they're going to be going into that housing. Now you will have more housing for the general population and now housing for that business to continue work.
Are there questions? I mean, I have a whole list more of questions, but I think it's time for audience-generated questions, if there are any. If you raise your hand and walk down to the podium and use the microphone, please.
My name is Dean Alexander. I'm a resident here of Ludlow. I see a trend here. It's about affordability. In the past few years, the Vermont legislature has passed measures to implement the clean heat standard, which is estimated to cost Vermonters up to $4 additional per gallon of fuel oil and $2 for propane. This tax is unaffordable for Vermonters. Current technology is not up to replacing these fuels as the main heat source for homes in our cold climate. The population of Vermont is currently about 630,000 people. This represents 8/10,000ths of the world's population. Do you feel, you are candidates, do you feel that as a representative of the people of Vermont, that continuing to pass legislation which will bring the clean heat standard into reality is in the best interest of your constituency? Or do you think it is more important to consider the immediate needs of the residents of Vermont and allow us to be able to continue to afford fuel to heat our homes, while we allow technology to reach a level which will allow us to move on from fossil fuels? Thank you.
Let's start with Mark on that.
So I almost wish you'd stay there so we can talk to you directly and kind of address you. But,
I'm here.
Sir, that is an incredibly important question that has been ranging about as I have gone around talking to folks. And the short answer is this. I hear a mix of responses from folks who are absolutely petrified because heating costs are going up. I remember years back when I could get a gallon of fuel oil for 90 cents, and how much are we paying now, roughly? 4? It's a lot. And the bottom line is, I'm sorry, that's just one of the expenses you have in home ownership and maintenance of your lifestyle. We can't allow those expenses to keep going up unchecked, and I do believe that the Heat Standards Act is resulting in that. I will say this, I'd love to be able to afford technologies that I could to replace my heating oil. I can't afford it. And the programs that are out there that are like coming in from the Clean Heat Standard, we're dealing more with mandates than providing opportunities for folks to become educated about what's out there and having legitimate programs that will help us afford it as homeowners. So as a general rule, I'm not a big fan of the clean heat standards. I think we do need to promote technologies. We need to do it in a way where we educate folks more and encourage and give them a path to those technologies, but not mandate them. And I hope that does justice to your question.
Adrian.
don't actually disagree completely with the gentleman sitting next to me. I was on the fence on the clean heat standards, but I was somewhat discouraged by the Public Service Board's reaction on whether or not, the Public Service Board was not able to come up with was not able to, I guess, come up with a solution on how the clean heat standards would be able to be enacted in an equitable way. And that gives me great pause. I think Efficiency Vermont does a fantastic job giving rebates and incentives to get people into clean technology. I would like to see us move faster. I have, 2 wood stoves, a propane furnace in our garage, a oil furnace in our house, and a heat pump. I use all of them, and I think they're all wonderful, solutions. Obviously, the wood heat and the oil and propane probably are not great for the environment, and I would love to be able to check them down. But my heat pump isn't significantly better. I also actually have solar panels, so I do sort of counteract that a little bit. So I'm on the fence. I can't really give you an answer one way or the other. I'd have to see what the actual plan is on how it would be enacted and how it would actually be paid for. Because I've heard all sorts of things, $4 a gallon to not more than 75 cents to 80 cents a gallon increase. No, I'm not arguing with which one is correct, but I don't know which one is. And I certainly wouldn't vote yes without being sure.
Becca, go ahead.
Thank you. There's been a pretty robust campaign against the clean heat standard, which was a concept put forward in the Affordable Heat Act, which is a study that looks at ways that we as a community can transition off of fossil fuels equitably. We are going to have to transition off of fossil fuels. Whether or not you believe global warming is real and that the hurricanes we're experiencing in Florida are being innumerably grown because of it, or if you understand that the cost of your bill is just going up every year, you know that we need to transition off of fossil fuels, and our thermal heating sector is one of our biggest ways that we need to do that. So we need to have a plan to transition off. So we worked on a plan to do that as a state, to make sure that the lowest income Vermonters got access to weatherization incentives, wood pellet heating stove support to transition from propane, to heat pump technology, which I think is what everyone is alluding to that sucks, but it actually is very effective, and 3/4 of all fossil fuel dealers also install heat pumps, so they also know it's a technology we should transition to. But that study has been bandied about to say that we have passed a major tax on fossil fuels, which we have not. We passed a study to consider how we transition away from fossil fuels, and I'm so proud of the 2 years of work we did to bring us to a point to investigate this question, because my future and your grandchildren's future is going to be dependent on how we answer these questions.
Jack?
As an engineer, I'm a firm believer in technology. I follow all the technology. So I'm not saying global warming is not a fact. What I'm saying is global warming should be looked at on an international scale. 2 of the biggest polluters in the world are China and India. They pollute more than any country in the world on a global scale. And so this should be handled by scientists in the UN, the global problem. Getting to our level, I think Vermont is about 99% forest. It absorbs a lot of the CO2, and I think that gentleman pointed it out. Our our pollution is on a very, very small scale compared to the world. So there are solutions, but right now the Clean Heating Act is not a solution. I vote no for it. It's a carbon tax. It will, in January, they vote to implement it or not to implement it. And I would vote no on that because right now it will do nothing but hurt the population of Vermont. Thank you.
Kevin?
And once again, I agree with Jack. Whether it's a $1.79 adder or $4 adder, we are hurting the population that we need to stay here in Vermont with families. I heat with wood, I heat with oil, and I just put in a heat pump. I'm all for clean, efficient energy, but we can't jump at, we are not able to be at the front of the line experimenting with our tax dollars here. We need to wait until the technology's proven to the point that we can afford to do it. We can't do all wonderful things hoping that it's going to work, and frankly, the administration of the tax that would be levied on the heating oil and the propane, that's not even clear as to how that's going to be administered. So until that's defined, it's high risk, and I would vote no.
Allison?
Vermonters are being devastated by climate change. It's the biggest challenge Vermont faces. 4 of our most iconic industries, agriculture, forest products industries, tourism, we have, all will be affected by climate change. We need to come up with responsible ways to clean up our own backyard. Yeah, we're small, but we clean up our own backyard. We cannot afford not to do something about this. We cannot afford to keep cleaning up after one disaster after another. The Affordable Heat Act is exactly that. It was named because we need to transition Vermonters off the incredibly devastating fossil fuels affordably. We are not going to move unless we can do it affordably, be rest assured. The misinformation is just shocking. We will be, particularly with the PUC's response, I think we will be looking at all sorts of new ideas. Everything is on the table. If you have a great idea, please share it with us. But this is a piece of action we need to take, and we need to do it to save your pocketbooks from being devastated by the increase in fossil fuel heat.
Jonathan?
So, I don't always agree with the Democrats.
Feel free to tonight.
What I do agree with is when they say we need to transition from fossil fuels, I agree with you. I totally agree. I don't agree with the rate and timing and the intensity with which they want to move away. I myself don't think this act is for Vermont. I feel as though I'm basing that decision on 2 studies. First, a private study, the NV5, they didn't like the Clean Heat Act. Now, the Public Utility Commission. This was commissioned by the state of Vermont and came up with the idea that this act is not a good one for Vermont. What they're trying to do is create a carbon credit market. Our state is too small to have such a market. We could easily put one of the fuel oil dealers out of business. So what's going to happen when you call for propane and nobody's there? There's not going to be another company that can start up and deliver these things for you. If we go through with this act, we're going to create a delivery crisis for you folks. We don't want that. We do want to start to transition to more renewable energy. I totally agree with that premise. This is not the way to do it. Thank you.
Joe?
So misinformation is rampant through this. One of the things is the Public Utility Commission is going to give the rest of the study to the legislature in January of 2025. And also I have to go back to one of the 3 things about the study that has to happen. It has to be affordable for Vermonters. It has to be affordable for Vermonters. So I can't, and I don't know if anyone on this panel can intelligently give you an answer to that simply because we have not seen the completed study. That has to happen. And anything that we do, we have to have data to make informed decisions. And without that, you're going to make uninformed decisions. You are having bias being sent to you by the fossil fuel industry. One of the things that they tell you how much it's going to cost, but they do not tell you what it is saving you. You have the expense without having the revenue. This has to happen to make informed decisions. So I can't say yes or no, but I will tell you this, and Ludlow knows better than anyone how badly the climate change is for you, because you didn't have a supermarket for over a year because of the flooding here in Ludlow.
Andrea, go ahead.
So let's talk misinformation. We've heard that the Clean Heat Standard is just a study. And yet, when you look at the Affordable Heat Act, it says this bill shall be enacted, or this action shall be enacted. The only reason this passed, because remember this was a veto override, and they received the votes for the veto override because they were required to put in there a look back, that the body, the House and the Senate, had to pass the actual processes by which this act would be brought forward. So they didn't know how this was going to be implemented, and then they would approve or deny that implementation come January. We have the study. The study said it would be about $17 million over 10 years to install these clean heat mandates. And $17 million for 300,000 households with an average $73,000 income and a heat pump. I have a 200-year-old house. I bought a heat pump a year ago. It's in the garage because I need to have new floors and have my house re-insulated before I leave and work in my home. And that's going to be the situation for many Vermonters. Our working families, seniors, and people on fixed incomes have no more to give from these mandated special interest agendas. I've pledged to vote no on the Clean Heat Standard because we need incentives, not goals. We need incentives and goals, not mandates, to encourage all of us to do our part for a better environment. Thank you.
Do we have more questions from the audience? Yes.
Mr. Moderator, question?
What?
Might I request 45 seconds of my time for the next question to add an additional response to the last question?
Absolutely. Sure.
Okay?
Sure. But go ahead. Yeah.
Hi, my name is Helena. My question is maybe simple. Are you committed to prioritizing childcare so we can solve the childcare crisis in Vermont? Thank you.
Yes, I
Let's start with, yeah.
Short answer, yes. I had actually spoken with this nice lady a little bit ago. My middle son is expecting their second baby in another month, and they have a 2-year-old, and they were contemplating whether or not his wife was going to have to stay home from her job, which would result in her losing some of her career activity and her career advancement because they could not afford childcare. They just found out that the new subsidies will make that baby affordable, which is wonderful, without her quitting her job. It is a game changer for our young people in this state to be able to have quality childcare and have help paying for it. It is ridiculously expensive. My oldest son lives in Kentucky. There are no subsidies in Kentucky. He and his wife pay almost $20,000 a year in childcare expenses. I mean, they have the ability to do some of that before taxes, but $20,000, people, that's ridiculous. So yes, Let's Grow Kids is an amazing thing. We need childcare subsidies. It is to the best interest of us all.
Back up.
Oh, yeah. Oh, sure. Yes. So just to repeat the question, would you prioritize childcare? Kind of, are you a childcare champion? Do you make that promise? Yes, I'm very proud to be endorsed by an organization called Let's Grow Kids, which was our main advocate for childcare in the State House. I can ad nauseum explain to you the value of investing in our 0 to 5 age range when you get double, triple, even quadruple the benefit of that investment later in life. But I really just want to note that this question is so important because we've had, I believe, all of our Republican senatorial opponents note that they would get rid of the payroll tax, which actually is funding the investments we made in the child care tax. in the child care work that we are now rolling out. So I do want to know the answer to that question, because I believe all of them have committed to getting rid of that payroll tax, and I would be disappointed if that were the case if they were to be elected. And the reason I would be disappointed if they were to do that is because we've just started to have incentives for our lowest and now moderate income families to get subsidization to pay for child care. And what we're seeing is women are able to return to the workforce, because 80% of the people who did not return to the workforce after COVID were women. And the number one reason they weren't returning was because they didn't have child care. Because exactly to the story we just heard, the cost of going back to work with childcare was almost equal, if not greater, to the benefit of the money you got from working. So that just doesn't economically work for our average families, and we needed to step in as a state to bring the three tent poles of this conversation, with business, state, and families all contributing to childcare.
Jack?
Can I go the light side just for a second? You've noticed throughout the meeting, Becca's been helping me out. I have my nifty-difty Dartmouth hearing aids in, so a lot of stuff is distorted. So my colleague, I'm a Republican, she's a Democrat, we work across the aisles, and she's helping me out, so I appreciate it, Becca. Believe it or not, this is one area that I agree with everything Becca said. I do support the payroll tax. The only thing is that payroll tax should be used for childcare, nothing else. As long as it's used for that, I agree. Now, I have my little granddaughter who's apple of my eye, and ever since she was about 5, off and on, I took her to daycare and all the way up to, we finally got her in high school. So yes, child care is a real problem. I know when my wife and I were first started working, we called it babysitting back then, was a real expense and real problem. So yes, I definitely a big supporter of that, and that tax I do support. Thank you.
Kevin?
I don't know how I'd vote because I don't know the details, but I do know this, that the best place for a young child to grow up is with their mother. I know that's traditional. That may not be exciting for many of us here, but I do know that that works better than sending your child off to child care. I also know that the expense isn't going to be different if the state pays for it or whether the parents pay for it. So one way or the other, the expense is going to be incurred. The question is where is it best for the child? And so I don't know how I'd vote on this bill, but the bottom line is I would like to see all parents, families, plan to be able to care for the children that they bring into the world.
Allison?
Well, happily, this bill has been enacted, and I'm a proud child care champion, and I'm thrilled that finally business is paying its fair share. For too long, you, taxpayers, the state, and families have been hemorrhaging to pay for child care. And finally, the other great beneficiary to child care, which is business, is now as invested as families and the state in helping support one of the most important workforce enablers, which is child care. We want everyone to work to their full potential, and children included. That's why we have a great public education system. But we also need parents to be able to working to their full potential, and child care has been the biggest barrier to getting everybody back to work. So I'm thrilled with where we've landed, and I am delighted it is passed.
Jonathan?
I'm also a proponent of child care. I don't like the payroll tax per se, but if it were used entirely for the child care aspect, then it's sort of okay. What I don't like about the payroll tax is it's coming out of your pocket too. If it's just limited to the employers, not as bad. I work for a large employer here in Ludlow, and what I've noticed at work is a highly successful program is their daycare. It enables many, many families to participate in the workforce because of either the subsidy or the free nature of the daycare. As a legislator, I think we should look towards incentivizing more corporations to paying for the child care for their employees. it's going to help them in the long run because they're going to find valuable employees that can spend more time at work, and they'll be happy that their children are well taken care of in the same area. Now they also don't have to spend as much time picking up the kids or dropping them off to the daycare system. And they're familiar with the workers who are taking care of the children. I think it's a great system that we have here. Thank you.
Joe.
I run a business that has 130 employees. Several of those employees are young families. And their number one concern is how they're going to pay for childcare. Until this payroll tax happened, they had to spend a substantial amount of their paycheck for childcare. We've alleviated some of that. We talk about recruiting young people to this area. This is one way to do it. We have so many barriers that we have we talk about workforce housing, so we have now one thing that will help attract young people to the area. I applaud the legislature for doing this, and it was forward-thinking, and it is hopefully something that we can do more of in the future. Thank you.
Andrea.
So you can bring our childcare, our daycare issues back to 2017 when they dramatically increased the regulations, closing hundreds of home care facilities. That created a childcare crisis. Then we needed to solve that crisis, and that created our taxes now, or our added payroll tax. So the lowest and I don't know about moderate income people that we're helping. So as of October 1st, the child care credit, if you make 575% of the federal poverty level, which is about $230,000, you qualify for child care subsidies. And you only need $1 million in assets that you self-report in order to maintain that qualification. I don't consider that moderate income that needs that type of support. I think that we can change the levels of who qualifies for it so that we can have more services available to use that money in a better way. Thank you.
Mark.
So I can promise you I absolutely will prioritize, I will absolutely prioritize childcare, because you can't possibly be expected to make a future for yourself if you simply can't work because there's nobody in your home or your environment that can help you look over your child. I watch with my wife our grandkids when our daughter can't be available, and that's when you have a family. When you don't have a family, it's scary on your own. We need to do more. And I'm pretty sure that the person, and I'm going to use the rest of this time to kind of shift back to the Clean Standards Act. I'm pretty sure that the persons who want to focus and prioritize childcare aren't thinking about how do we make our environment cleaner, how do we reduce flooding, all right? I understand that Allison Clarkson has been working tirelessly on these environmental and climate change standards and some of the incentives. It would tire me too. The bottom line is this: there hasn't been a change in over 20 years. I mean, we've had Irene. We haven't focused on emergency planning. And I heard a candidate say, you know, Florida had a flood yesterday. I don't think somebody who's in the middle of a flood is going to be thinking about how do we reduce our carbon footprint when we're really trying to figure out how to bail out of the disaster that just hit us. And we really need to be focusing on emergency planning.
Other questions from the audience?
Hi, my name's August Murray. I'm from Weathersfield. And my question for the group is, for our older population, our seniors, I have elderly parents that live nearby. With the affordability crisis, what advice would you give them how to deal with the affordability crisis What things should they give up in order to stay in their homes and keep food in their house? That's my question.
Becca, let's start with you.
Sure. So we work with constituents all the time who bring up questions of their financial ability to afford where they live. That's an ongoing part of being a state senator. And in fact, many of us, myself included, who serve in this role have family members who are on a fixed income. My mother lives with us. She makes $13,000 a year, and she's worked her entire life. So I understand the situation that you're describing very clearly. I would recommend that they make sure they're getting their full Medicare. I mean, if you're asking for like legitimate advice, like I would say I would make sure you're getting the full amount of your Medicare. And if you qualify for a supplement plan, to really investigate that. And we have health exchange coordinators. Senior Solutions is a really good resource, and they can offer financial assistance like heating fuel assistance if you're on a fixed income. There are also programs that can support home share, so if you're not in a viable location with a big home and you need to downsize. Yeah, I mean, I could really give you the full list of services that I would recommend, but you should know that if we continue to underfund those services, they won't be available to our seniors. Another bill that I've co-sponsored in the past is reducing the tax or removing the tax on Social Security income. That would be something I would say legislatively, but it sounded like the question was more geared away from legislative work, but rather towards constituent services.
Jack?
As a senior, I won't tell you how old I am, but I'm over 65. As a senior, I can identify 100% with that question. The first thing is property tax. The seniors are on fixed incomes, and property tax, there's two things you can do with it. First off, all night long I've said how I would lower property tax and cap it. That's the first thing I would do. As a senior, I would look into possibly eliminating property tax totally for seniors. You may not be able to do this, but I would have it at a very low rate. Other thing that seniors face are their prescriptions. You know, most of us are on Part A and Part B of Medicare. So, you know, we have to, with this fixed income, you know, we have our drug prescriptions that have to be affordable, and we have to be able to afford our Medicare, or our medicine and trips to the hospital. But the big thing is a lot of seniors are losing their property because of property tax, and that's a big thing. So you really have to cap that. Thank you.
Kevin?
Costs keep going up. We need to find ways to reduce the cost for everyone, but in particular those who are on fixed income. And certainly, Becca, I'm with you that family should take care of family. That's a very practical, rational way to approach helping our loved ones out. Once again, if the government's paying for it, the government's not paying for it, you're paying for it. So what's the most efficient way to take care of our seniors, help them be able to afford it? We need to reduce the costs of the list of items that we are paying for across the board. We cannot keep adding to the list that us taxpayers are paying for and help our seniors in their situation.
Allison?
Thank you. Thank you, August. Good question. We do a lot to help make a life for our elders more affordable. First thing, I'd make sure everyone files their homestead declaration so that they could apply for income sensitivity and pay their property tax from their income. One of the biggest programs we do to make people able to stay on their own properties is current use. If they have 25 acres or more, to make sure they're in current use, because that makes a huge difference. It's one of the ways we make staying here affordable. I would also encourage them to look at home share. They can have people come into their home and share their home. A lot of older people, if they live alone, love having company and love having the help that a home share person provides. Or create an accessory dwelling unit, which brings more income in for them, which is a great idea we support. Heating fuel assistance, Social Security tax. We don't tax income on Social Security, $70,000 or less for a household. I would encourage us to raise that income level that's lagged behind for a bit. So I think you'll see a move this year to raise that income level on the exemption for Social Security. And I would also continue to do our work reducing prescription drug costs, which are a huge cost for our elders. So those are the things I would do, and also encourage them to engage with their senior centers, because our senior centers provide such good value for our seniors and such a good sort of sociability.
Jonathan.
Thank you for the question. What I would encourage your parents to do is vote Republican. As I sit here before you, I'm the only candidate on the stage to have been endorsed by Governor Scott. The reason why he's giving out endorsements this year are all of the veto overrides that we just saw. 6 of them, 6 veto overrides. Governor Scott called the incumbents a little bit arrogant, and I personally think that that's true. We need to restore the respect for the governor that used to be there. We used to not have us and them mentality. What I want to do is get into the legislature and start to work across the aisle. Our legislature works best when we make deals with one another, and it's a solution that we all agree on. With the supermajority that we have right now, it's a one-party system, one-party rule. That's not good for Vermont. Thank you.
Joe, your turn.
So, I'm going to disagree with you a little bit, Jonathan. We do not have one party rule. We have an executive branch and a legislative branch. The executive branch is Republican, and the legislative branch is Democrat. Now, if the governor wants to reach out his hand and work with the Democrats, we are more than happy to do so. If he wants to show up for a meeting and for the housing taxes, we are more than happy, so we can find common ground. But you got to show up. That's the first thing. And I've said this time and time again, and I know may sound like a broken record, but if the Democrat and Republican situation is more like a car transmission. If you vote Democrat, you're going forward. If you vote Republican, you're going backwards. The other thing, and now to get to the actual question, is I think Vermont is one of 7 states that tax Social Security. I agree with Senator Clarkson that we need to look at that to raise that minimum standard because that's one of the things that seniors are talking to me about, is to raise that minimum standard going forward. Thank you.
Andrea.
So first, I'll say we haven't been elected yet. So hold that. As far as the meeting for the governor was meeting with FEMA at the time of this meeting and dealing with the flooding issues. So I think we should give him a pass on that one. And they should have rescheduled that meeting. We do need to look at property taxes, but we also need to look at removing that Social Security tax. And until I mentioned it at 3 forums ago, that wasn't even on their radar, and it still isn't. That's just a talking point right now. And as far as our funding, we have an $8.5 billion with a B fiscal year budget. That's $13,280 for every man, woman, and child in Vermont. That is way too high. Not a single Democrat at this forum mentioned anything about cutting taxes. They talked about new taxes, they talked about shuffling taxes, never reducing those taxes. And another thing we need to quickly talk about is the way to reduce taxes is to bring those people to Vermont. One way to do that is to remove the veterans benefits. Let's make those tax-free so that when they choose a job, these young, well-trained retirees, and they choose a job, they're going to choose Vermont. Not every town, the state around here that does waive the taxes on veterans benefits. That's going to bring families into our community. That's going to bring healthcare insurance into our community. It's going to bring hard workers and people that are going to build these houses out. That's how we get more people into this community. Thank you.
Mark.
Mr. August, I'm going to talk about senior needs, because that was the question. So, it's not a matter of Republican or Democrat. We all have friends and family, clients who are 65 and aging into a population, and they don't know what they're going to do. Most of the folks that I know who are over that age range are working full-time. And that's kind of a hard place to be. Now, I'm getting near that stage. I don't have anything saved aside, and we worry all the time. How are we going to manage if we aren't able to work? And with the medical circumstances these days, it only takes one medical issue to knock you out of work, and now you are SOL. We have to really be thinking about the aging population and make them be able to transition into a safe future, and we're not doing that. And now maybe is the only independent I can kind of segue back into this kind of concept of what are we really tasked to do as senators or as other legislators? We're tasked to represent our community. We have to make sure everybody's got what they need in a time where we have very limited resources and we really have little consensus on how to divide it. Our incumbents filed a self-attestation on Vermont Digger. I suggest you take a look at it. They both indicate, our incumbent senators in Windsor District, indicated that they think things are better for Vermonters than 10 years back. I think things are worse over 20 years ago. If you want to change things, you have to take different measures. And what I would say is, it's not Democrat or Republican, it's do you want someone to be a voice of change? And that's where I stand.
So. Adrienne.
Hi. This is a really difficult problem, and I do like the idea of exempting more Social Security. Our seniors that are dependent on Social Security really are in a rough place. But you also have to consider the huge numbers of retired people in Vermont that are incredibly wealthy. Now, you know, we're sort of forgetting that demographic. Those are the people that moved into Vermont in the pandemic. They're the people that were already here. I can't tell you how many, the number of people that my eldest son has been approached by that have foundations that are headquartered in Vermont. Now, they're not our hurting seniors. We need to help the people that are having trouble, whether they're seniors, whether they're young people, whether they're middle-aged people. We don't want anyone to lose their house or where they're living because they can't afford their taxes, they can't afford to live there. I say we support people in any way we can.
My suggestion, and it's 8:45 already. I have more questions, but my suggestion is that we switch to the closing statements from everybody, and that'll take us to about 9, just about, or a little bit after, and I think that will probably do it, unless people object. I have a dozen more questions, but I think we all probably want to close it down. Let's start, if this, and we'll give you 2 minutes each for a closing statement, starting with you, Jack.
Yeah. Vermonters are currently faced with overwhelming political crisis due to plans enacted by the supermajority of the state legislature. Now, here's what the issues that they're facing. Out-of-control drug use and crime in Vermont, the housing crisis in Vermont, property taxes in Vermont, school funding in Vermont, health care premiums in Vermont, DMV costs in Vermont, payroll taxes, which I'm in support of, but payroll taxes, Global Warming Solutions Act in Vermont, the Clean Heat Standard. These are all the issues that we're currently faced. Now, in addition to this, all the people in Vermont are faced with inflation and food costs. And right now, Vermonters are becoming overwhelmed with all this. Now, if I'm elected, there's not one single issue that I would focus on. I would focus on all these, but my immediate focus would be on the heating standard, which we can vote for in January to stop that. But I would focus on the rest of it. Now, okay, right now in Vermont, you know, all of us look, okay, I'll end it there.
Thanks, Jeff. Kevin.
I'd like to thank FOLA for putting this event on tonight. I think information is important when we're making big decisions. And I thank the moderators for using our time well. Thank you. And I thank you for coming out, because if we don't listen to each other, we're just going to keep fighting instead of getting to some real solutions. Pre-retirement, I gained 40 years in the industrial, commercial, business world. And I not only survived, but I thrived because my decisions generally were correct. You don't survive in a situation like that unless you make good decisions. I'm thankful for that, I'm proud of that, but that's what we need to start doing, because obviously the list of problems that we're talking about tonight are almost endless. And I'd ask you, if we don't change something, we're going to continue to talk about the same problems moving forward. As a legislator, I will focus on listening to what the problem is and get to the root cause, not based on assumptions or rumors or misinformation. We got to understand what's causing the problem. I will talk to those people who know the ropes and understand the right way to get to the solutions. We'll look at pros and cons, we'll look at the cost plus benefits, risk and rewards, and if there are multiple good solutions, I'll compromise. But if it comes down to right or wrong, I will make the tough decision and vote against the grain to get us to a place we need to be. We need change. We can't keep doing what we're doing. For all of our sakes, we need to make Vermont affordable, and we've got to figure out how to do that in a bipartisan way and work together. So we need to be able to communicate in a polite, intelligent fashion and not be fighting with each other over issues that are more of the heart rather than facts. If you vote for me, I will bring common sense and a balance to Montpelier to the best of my ability, 1 out of 150. Not very influential, but that little bit may make a difference. Thank you for your time.
Allison.
Thank you for this lively and informative forum. I appreciate the opportunity to share our views and our values. I love representing the Windsor District. Every year I get to know our 25 towns better, meet incredible people, enjoy the many different town traditions and our district's incredible natural beauty. Legislators are not just lawmakers. We are active teammates working to improve our communities. We are problem solvers. Every committee in the State House is focused on how to solve problems Vermonters face every day. We work across the aisle all the time, compromising on policy and bills in order to make progress for Vermont. 90% of our decisions are made by consensus. I'm a team builder. I help make things happen, and I work hard advocating for my constituents. If elected, I will bring my energy and enthusiasm to the Senate to work on your behalf. I'm proud of my work as a legislator. I've helped invest in affordable housing development, further protect Vermont's environment, create a statewide ethics code, navigate the challenges of COVID, create sustainable support for childcare, protect our reproductive freedoms, improve gun safety, raise the minimum wage, and enact marriage equality. I'd appreciate your vote to send me back into the fray to continue the work we need to do to deliver for the people of Vermont. saving our environment, supporting our children and families, working to keep Vermont affordable and livable. With the values and experience I bring to the legislature, I believe I can help make a difference to the lives of Vermonters and in the well-being of our state. Thanks a million.
Jonathan.
Hi. Thank everybody for coming. I really appreciate the turnout. It's always great to have a bunch of people out there in the audience. I don't like it when there's hardly anybody that shows up, so I appreciate you all coming out. And thank you to FOLA for organizing this. It's been wonderful. What I'd like everybody to think about me is I'm a moderate Republican, not a hard right person, willing to look at all the issues, work across the aisle, and come up with sustainable, workable, sensible solutions. I'm not a unilateralist. I like to collaborate. My background is both in large business and small business. I was a painting contractor for years, so I'm used to working in the residential realm as well as commercial. I worked in an international company overseas, and I've been lucky enough to work in all sorts of different environments with different diverse cultures and peoples. I've worked in kingdoms, I've worked in socialisms, and I've worked in economies like ours. So I've seen it all. I feel as though my educational background is good for looking at environmental issues, water, ecological issues, as well as disposal for waste and things like that. I also have an MBA, so I'm good at planning, budgeting, marketing, all of those sorts of things as well. I know I'm a political newcomer, and that's why I felt I needed to introduce myself a little bit to you. What I'm really looking for is to introduce a little bit of political stability to the legislature. As I mentioned before, we have a supermajority, which you're all aware of. I truly believe that the Vermont legislature works best when it's balanced, and we have to work with one another to come up with solutions that work for all of us. It doesn't work well when one party is able to dictate terms and conditions. Thank you very much.
Joe?
First, want to thank FOLA for hosting this, and I want to thank you for coming. It's important that you come to make sure that the candidates that are sitting on the stage align with what you want Vermont to be. I would also say it is something that I appreciate everyone on this dais. And the reason why is we have different views. And I enjoy listening. As my mother would say, you know, shut up and listen. And that's important because instead of imposing my view necessarily on the people on this dais, I shut up and we may have that debate, and they may teach me something that I did not know. That's what we have to do. I will tell you about my journey to run. I first called Brendan McNamara. He is the Ludlow town manager. Because I knew that Ludlow was going through a tough time with flooding, among other issues. And we talked for about 10 minutes, and I heard the pain in his voice when he talked about trying to mitigate not having a supermarket, and his citizens had to go to Rutland or Springfield for grocery shopping, or him having to deal with FEMA on a continual basis. And I knew at that time that I could help. I knew at that time that my experience in service, whether it be in the military, whether it be an elected official, or whether it be a member of the Rotary, I truly take the motto of the Rotary to heart, and that is service above self. Thank you.
Andrea.
So thank you, FOLA, for having this forum, and thank you all so much for coming to listen tonight. I'm running for the Vermont State Senate because I believe we must make Vermont more affordable for everyone. I'm a farmer and a working mom who's grounded in the realities of life that so many of us are facing. Soaring cost of living, high property taxes, and feeling like we're not being heard by a disconnected career politicians. My opponents are pushing for costly, extreme policies that divide us. They've mocked our governor, his staff, and they've stated they're not willing to work with us or others. I'm committed to bring us back to the middle, focusing on common sense solutions that work for all Vermonters, not just the extremes. We need to focus on lowering taxes, eliminate taxes on Social Security benefits for our seniors, and ensure that our government lives within a reasonable budget. Our land, our traditions, and our strong sense of community are what defines us as Vermonters, and these values must be protected for our future generations. I'm a Native American woman, and on Monday, it's my day to reflect. I feel a deep burden for those of us having their way of life destroyed, and young families are being forced into compressed urban housing. Haven't we learned anything from our history? I'm committed to being a voice for the people of Windsor District. I'll work with our governor and across the aisle to craft fiscally responsible solutions that create opportunity, growth, and bring our young kids back home. My vision is for a Vermont where we can all thrive, where our government works for the people, not partisan politics. It's time for change. And this election, I'd be honored to receive one of your votes if you think so too. Thank you.
Mark.
So, first off, just a quick explanation of why I wear a mask. I'm going through chemotherapy right now, and I have a compromised immune system, so I'm not carrying any cooties or anything like that. But I recognize that sometimes we have to go the distance because it's not really good for me to be talking with a mask and not you see my face and my eyes, and really letting you know where I'm coming from. I'm willing to make sacrifices. I often help clients in moments that you wouldn't expect an attorney to do. Most recently, I got a phone call from a client who was being evicted by the police from a hotel because the owner wanted her out. And I brought her case without any compensation to the court. And what I ran into was I wasn't aware until I did the research. Apparently, legislature cut out an exemption for hotels so that they were effectively not required to provide habitable premises or follow the normal rules that you are supposed to follow when you're evicting a tenant. And this client, I wasn't able to protect her because the laws were set up against her. We have so many laws that maybe are well-intentioned, but really aren't doing the trick. I heard some mention about the renter's rebate. I wonder if anybody realizes that when you increase property taxes to cover renter's rebate, landlord who's renting to the renter is going to get the rebate has to pay more and then raises the rent. And now the tenant has to pay more rent only to hope to get it back if they know about the renter's rebate program and participate in it. These are the sort of things that I observe as a lawyer. These are the things that my clients see. Landlords tell me, oh, we're just done. It's so hard to be a landlord because the laws are so convoluted. Even the judges say, these are really tough to figure out, and there's no consensus. If I go up to Montpelier, I'm going to be focusing on reviewing these laws and trying to bring some common sense and redoing things. And it's important to have somebody who will actually try to make a change. I would simply tell you, and I love this saying, insanity is always doing the same thing and expecting a change. If you don't think things are good now, you need to think about a change, and you need to think about voting for somebody who's not an incumbent. I'm running as an independent. I hope you'll support my candidacy.
Adrienne?
Thank you. Thank you for the opportunity to speak to you all. You've heard my responses to the questions that have been asked, but I'm happy to stay to answer any further questions you may have. maybe not till midnight, but for a while. What I do want to stress to you is that while I will be a newbie in the legislature, I have years of experience in both town government and in Vermont's somewhat confusing school finance system. I served on a school board for over 20 years. At one point, I think I was on 3 different school boards at the same time. I believe that these experiences allow me to understand how proposed legislation will really affect our towns and school systems. Sometimes I cringe at the end of the legislative session, and that's not a diss on anybody who's here, but amazing things happen in that last week that it boggles my mind sometimes. My other life experiences, working, family, serving as a GAL, which is a guardian ad litem in the Rutland Family Court, provides me with a lot of perspective and understanding of the complicated social problems Vermont is facing currently. It kills me that we're throwing everybody out of those motels. How can we expect families to live in a tent in October? I didn't even want to put away my outside furniture today. I cannot imagine having my 3-year-old living in a tent. I don't understand it. We must provide help to people, but we must expect them to help themselves, to work, to succeed. I am proudly socially liberal and fiscally careful. In terms of what my first term would look like, to be honest, I don't see a first-term legislator to be the writer of a lot of new legislation. It's a time to learn how things work in Montpelier, who to trust, and who to work with. That would be my plan, if I'm elected. Thank you.
Becca?
I'm going to stand because we've been sitting for so long. Thank you for coming. We didn't have an introduction at the beginning, but you should know my background. I served on my select board starting when I turned 20. I ran for office and did that for 4 years. After that, I served as a state representative for another 4 years until I ran for the Senate. So I have experience, although I might be one of the younger faces in the crowd of candidates tonight. I grew up in the village of Wilder, which is in the town of Hartford, and I experienced what it was like to be a child on Dr. Dinosaur, a child who had access to free school meals, and I was a product of the public education system. So I really do understand the implications of when we make strategic cuts to our education system. I hope that you re-elect Senator Clarkson and I hope that you add Joe Major to the ticket, but we can't forget to remember and thank those who are not running, who are not on the stage with us tonight. I think we should take a moment to thank Representative Logan Nicole for his years of service, and I also think we should take a moment to thank Senator McCormick, who is here tonight, for his years of service. Thank you very much, Senator McCormick. It's not easy to do that. And we also have Senator Al Snitka, who has served you as a community for generations. So thank you, Senator Snitka. And the reason I want to highlight that is we've heard a lot of conversation about how poorly the legislature does business and how partisan we are. But most of our decisions are consensus-based. We're actually extremely collegiate, as you see tonight. So I hope when you heard someone say that they would work across party lines, that it didn't come after an insult to another political party, because that does make it harder to work together. And whoever represents Windsor County should be willing to communicate without insulting or misinforming constituencies. So I hope that you vote for the candidates that reflected that for you tonight, and thank you for coming.
I'd like to thank all of the candidates for their participation tonight, and all of you who came, and those who unfortunately had to leave a little bit earlier. We can keep going if we want, but I suspect we're done, if that's okay. So thank you very much.
7:30.